"Read the third panel, Lance Corporal," out loud, the name at the top. It was 0940 in the morning, and the sun had come up hard over the parade deck, and Lance Corporal Ty Halloran stood in the front rank of a memorial dedication in his dress uniform, with his white gloves shaking so badly that the Marine beside him had begun, quietly, to look somewhere else. First Sergeant Roy Tolliver did not look at him at all. He stood at Halloran's shoulder, with his hands behind his back and his eyes on the granite, and he asked the question a second time in exactly the same voice he had used the first time, which was the thing about First Sergeant Tolliver that men remembered for the rest of their lives. "The third panel, the name at the top." Read it. Halloran opened his mouth. Nothing came out of it. 200 people stood behind him in folding chairs on the grass, and a band waited at parade rest, and a sheet of white cloth hung over the granite wall, waiting to come down at 0900 hours, plus whatever ceremony required, and Halloran could not make a sound, because he had spent the previous night in a sodium-lit fitness pavilion 400 meters from where he was now standing, and because he already knew what the name on the third panel was going to be. 11 hours and 40 minutes earlier, the pavilion had belonged to 3 men who had no business still being awake. The working party had run long. It always ran long. A truckload of ammunition cans that should have taken 90 minutes had taken 4 hours, because somebody at the far end of the chain had counted wrong in the morning, and by the time the 3 of them had been released, it was past 21:30, and the chow hall was closed, and there was nothing left of the evening but a walk back to the barracks in cammies that smelled like grease and cardboard. They had stopped at the outdoor fitness pavilion the way tired men stop anywhere, without deciding to. It sat between the motor pool road and the barracks, in a rectangle of light thrown down by 4 sodium lamps on tall poles, a pull-up rig, a set of parallel bars, a climbing rope on a steel frame, and a pit of pale sand raked flat by somebody's punishment detail. On the far side stood a chain-link equipment cage with a corrugated roof and a light burning inside it, where a 61-year-old man in a facilities polo shirt was counting medicine balls onto a clipboard because it was his job to count them and because there was nobody else on the installation at that hour to talk to. Lance Corporal Ty Halloran was 22 years old and had been having the kind of week that gets taken out on strangers. He hung off the pull-up bar by one hand, swinging, narrating. Private First Class Shane Dellinger, 21, sat on the low rail of the parallel bars with his phone out, laughing at everything, which was Dellinger's function in the group, and always had been. Lance Corporal Owen Pruitt, 23, leaned against the upright with his arms folded and laughed slightly less, and there was a fourth man, Private First Class Nico Farrow, 20 years old, standing back by the climbing rope, where the light did not quite reach, who had not laughed at anything in an hour. The old woman came up the concrete path from the direction of the parade deck at 4 minutes past 2200. She was small, and she walked without hurry, and she wore a plain red windbreaker zipped to the throat over dark trousers, and her hair was white and worn at an ordinary length, and she carried nothing at all in her hands. She came out of the dark at the low end of the path and into the sodium light and kept going, straight across the pavilion, taking the concrete because the concrete was the way through. Halloran dropped off the bar. "Ma'am." She did not look over. "Ma'am. Ma'am." He stepped out onto the path in front of her at an angle, hands wide, playing it for the 2 behind him. "You're on the wrong side of the fence. This is a Marine Corps installation. It's not the walking track at the senior center." Dellinger laughed. Pruitt made a low noise that was almost a laugh. She did not stop walking, and she did not answer, and that was the part he could not stand. Halloran moved to cut the angle, and something happened that he did not see and could not have described afterward if he had. The old woman turned perhaps a quarter of the way toward him. Not a step, not a flinch, nothing you would call a movement. and the geometry of the path between them was suddenly wrong for him. He had aimed himself at where she had been standing, and she was no longer standing in it, and he had to take an extra half-step to recover, and the half-step made him look clumsy in front of his friends, and he blamed her for it. In the equipment cage, Gus Whitlock put down his clipboard. He had been a gunnery sergeant for 11 of his 22 years, and he had spent the 11 since running a facilities contract on a base full of people who were young enough to be his children, and he had learned to keep his opinions inside the chain link. But he had seen that quarter turn. He had seen it done well perhaps a dozen times in his life, and every one of those times had been on a mat, by somebody being paid to teach it. He came to the cage door and stood in it, and did not say anything yet. Out on the path, Halloran stepped fully into her way with both boots planted, and for the first time all evening, the old woman stopped. "There we go," Halloran said. "There she is. Now we're talking. What are you doing out here at 10 o'clock at night, ma'am?" The old woman looked at him. She had a way of looking at a person that did not travel up and down them, the way most people look, but simply arrived and stayed. "Vigil ended at 2150, she said. "Gate 6 is 800 meters. This is the short way." There was a pause of perhaps 2 seconds, and in that pause, something small went past the three of them, without any of them catching it. Nobody's grandmother says 800 meters. Pruitt caught the edge of it and turned it into a joke, because that was what you did with a thing you did not understand, at 23 years old in front of your friends. "She sounds like a range card," he said. "You sound like a range card, ma'am." Dellinger laughed and lifted his phone slightly. Halloran did not laugh, quite. He had heard it too, and it had put a splinter in him, and instead of pulling the splinter out, he pressed on it. "The Vigil," he said. "Right. For the wall. You know somebody on the wall, ma'am? You got a husband on the wall?" "No," the old woman said. "No," Halloran repeated, delighted. "Just came out for the free coffee then." She said nothing. She stood on the concrete with her hands at her sides, and there was a stillness to her that was beginning, very faintly, to be a problem in the pavilion, though not one of the three of them could have said why. Halloran was moving constantly, shifting, gesturing, rolling his shoulders, working the audience. Dellinger's phone tracked back and forth. Pruitt tapped a boot heel against the upright. The old woman did not move at all. She did not fold her arms. She did not put a hand in a pocket. She did not do any of the things people do with their hands when they're being spoken to unkindly by strangers in an empty place at night. Her eyes went briefly to the pull-up rig. "That bar's going to fail," she said. Halloran turned to look at it, then back at her, grinning. "Excuse me?" "The rig. Second weld on the crossmember, inboard side. It's a cold lap." She said it without emphasis, the way a person reads out a serial number. The Corps was still buying that rig in 1990, and they were still failing then. "It will go on the third man, not the first." "The third man," Halloran said. "The first two shock it. The third one opens it." The silence that followed had a different texture than the silence before it. In the cage doorway, 30 feet away, Gus Whitlock heard her call the rig by the supply nomenclature, the full designation, the one printed on the property card that hung on a nail 6 inches from Whitlock's left hand, and that he was fairly sure nobody had read aloud in that pavilion in 20 years. And he went very still. "Say that again," he said, "to nobody." He looked at the old woman in the red windbreaker standing under the sodium lamp with 3 young men around her, and he thought about the fact that this was the 3rd night running he had watched her come up that path at 4 minutes past 2200, walking the same route, at the same speed, with nothing in her hands. 3 nights. Same time. Same route. That was not how a lost dependent walked. That was how a person walked a ground they had already looked at. Whitlock had spent 22 years in the Marine Corps, and he had learned exactly one thing about old people on military installations that he had never been able to explain to anybody younger. Some of them were not visitors. Some of them were the reason the installation had a name. Out on the path, Halloran had recovered. He had decided that the bar comment was a lucky guess, or nonsense, or the kind of thing an old woman says to sound important. And he had decided it because the alternative was standing in the light with a splinter in his hand, and no way to explain it. "You know a lot about welding, ma'am?" "I know a lot about that rig." "Yeah." He spread his hands wide, turning half toward Dellinger and the phone. "You Corps of Engineers or something? You a contractor? You want to write it up?" "I want to walk to Gate 6, the old woman said. And Whitlock stepped out of the cage into the light and started walking. Dellinger stood up off the parallel bars and brought the phone up properly, framing, and the moment he did it, the evening changed its shape. A phone is an audience, and an audience is a contract, and Halloran had never in his life been able to walk away from a contract. "All right," he said, loud now, for the lens. "All right. We got a situation here. We got Granny Recon out here at 2200, giving out engineering assessments." "Granny Recon," Dellinger repeated, laughing behind the phone. "You want to show us, ma'am? You want to hop up there and do one? One pull-up. One. I'll spot you." Halloran slapped the bar with the flat of his hand, and the sound of it went out across the empty pavilion and came back off the barracks wall. "Come on, show us how they did it in your day." Pruitt drifted around the far side of the path without appearing to have decided anything. He came to a stop with the sand pit at his back and the concrete in front of him, and the effect of it, though not one of the three of them would have used the word, was that the old woman now had a man on either side of her and a rig behind her, and the dark ahead. She looked at Pruitt, then at Halloran. "Step aside," she said. That was all. No volume, no edge. Her hands did not come up, did not open, did not close. They stayed exactly where they had been since she stopped walking, which was at her sides, relaxed, palms turned very slightly inward. "Step aside," Halloran said to the phone, delighted. She said, "Step aside." "Knock it off." The voice came from behind them. Whitlock had crossed half the pavilion and stopped at the edge of the sodium light, 61 years old in a facilities polo shirt with a clipboard still in his left hand, and there was enough in his tone that all three of them turned. "It's 10 o'clock at night," Whitlock said. "You've been up since 0430, and you're standing around a 70-year-old woman with a phone out. Go to bed." For a moment it hung. Pharaoh, back by the rope, took a step forward. Then Halloran laughed and turned back around. "Go back in your cage, old man. Count your basketballs." Whitlock stood there another second and a half. He looked at the three of them, and then he looked at the woman in the red windbreaker, and she looked back at him, and something passed between the two of them that had nothing to do with anyone else in the pavilion. A flat, unhurried acknowledgement, the look of two people who have both worked in the same building at different times. Then Whitlock turned around and walked back toward the cage, and he did not walk like a man going to count basketballs. He walked fast. Pharaoh said, from the rope, "Ty, hey, that's enough." Nobody heard him, or three people heard him, and none of them answered, which on that particular night amounted to the same thing. If you have ever watched the young forget what the old already paid, stay with this one and subscribe to the Veteran Vault. The camera light stayed on. It threw a small, hard white circle onto the front of the red windbreaker, and inside that circle, the old woman had still not moved. What happened next happened because of the phone, and everyone who reviewed it afterward said so, including the man who did it. Halloran wanted her facing the lens. That was all. He was 22 years old, and 4 hours behind on a working party that had not been his fault. and a woman had made him look clumsy on a concrete path in front of his friends, and he wanted the frame to end, with her looking into the camera so that the video would have a shape. He reached out and took hold of her sleeve at the elbow and pulled to turn her. The old woman looked down at the hand on her arm. She did not look at Halloran's face. She looked at the hand, the way a person looks at a piece of equipment that has been left somewhere it should not have been left. "Take your hand off me," she said. "Last warning. I was Force Recon." For about a second and a half, the pavilion was completely silent. Then Pruitt made a sound like a kettle, and Dellinger's laugh came out of him in a bark that nearly took the phone out of his grip, and Halloran threw his head back and howled at the sodium lamp, and the three of them went off like a string of firecrackers under a steel roof. "Force Recon," Halloran said when he could. "Force Recon. Sure you were." He wiped his eye with the back of his wrist. "And I'm the Commandant of the Marine Corps. Say it again. Say it again for the camera, sweetheart." Pruitt repeated it in a falsetto, hand on his hip. "Last warning, I was Force Recon." Dellinger had the phone in both hands now to keep it steady. Bro. This is going in the platoon chat." The old woman did not repeat it. She had said it once, in the flat, unhurried voice of a person passing on information, the same voice she had used for 800 meters and for the weld on the cross member. And having said it, she appeared to consider the matter closed, and that was somehow worse than if she had shouted. Halloran let go of her sleeve because he had to let go in order to shove her, and he shoved her. It was not a hard shove. Afterward, in a room with a lawyer in it, a great deal would be made of how hard it was and was not. He put the heel of his hand into her shoulder and pushed her back a pace, the way one man moves another man out of a doorway. She gave with it. That was the thing that Gus Whitlock saw, 30 feet away, and it was the thing that made him stop walking and take his phone out of his pocket rather than reach for the cage door. She did not stiffen, and she did not stagger. She did not put a foot out behind her for balance the way a 71-year-old woman on a concrete path at night, absolutely, without exception, puts a foot out behind her. She absorbed the shove through her whole body, moved backward exactly as far as the force required, and not 1 inch farther, and arrived stopped, square, with her weight already back underneath her. You cannot fake that. There is no way to arrive at that by accident. That is 6 months on a mat, and then 20 years of not forgetting. The three of them closed in a little. Not much. Half a step each, the way men do when a thing has gone further than they meant it to, and none of them wants to be the one who says so. "Say it again," Halloran said, and there was less laughter in it now. Pharaoh said, "Tiautot." Nobody heard him, and a hand closed on the back of her collar. Gus Whitlock did not call the guard shack. That was the decision that mattered, and he made it standing in the doorway of a chain-link equipment cage, with his thumb already moving. The guard shack would send a duty driver, and the duty driver would take 15 minutes, and in 15 minutes, the thing happening on the concrete outside would be finished, one way or the other. So he scrolled past the duty desk, and past the provost number, and down to a name he had kept in his phone for 11 years, without ever having a reason to press it. It rang twice. "Bracken. Master Guns, it's Gus Whitlock. Fitness Pavilion, the one off the motor pool road." Whitlock kept his voice low, and his eyes through the chain link. "3 of yours are out here at 2200 putting hands on an old woman in a red jacket. And Master Guns, I think I know who she is." There was a silence on the line of about 1 second. "Say the jacket again." "Red. Windbreaker. Small woman. White hair. Walks like she's counting the ground. Don't let her leave." The line went dead. Whitlock looked at the phone. Then he put it in his pocket and came back out of the cage and across the concrete at a pace that surprised his own knees. and he did not stop at the edge of the light this time. He walked all the way in. Halloran. He did not know the man's name. He read it off the cammies as he came. Halloran. Let go of her. Halloran's hand was still on the collar of the windbreaker. He turned his head, and there was something in his face now that had not been there 10 minutes earlier. Not shame yet, but the first cold current underneath the water. He was in it. He had been in it since he took her sleeve, and part of him knew it, and the part of him that knew it was being shouted down by the part that had an audience. I'm not doing anything, he said. You have got about 90 seconds, Whitlock said, and then this stops being a thing you did and starts being a thing that happened to you. Yeah? Son. Whitlock stopped 6 feet away and put the clipboard down flat on the parallel bars because he wanted both hands empty. You have no idea what you have got hold of. None. I am telling you that as a man who did 22 years and who has been standing in that cage watching you for 4 minutes trying to talk himself out of what he is looking at. Pruitt's laugh had stopped. Pruitt was looking at the old woman's hands. Because that was the thing once you saw it. Through all of it, the mockery, the phone, the shove, the collar, her hands had never come up. Not to block, not to plead, not to peel the fingers off the fabric at the back of her neck. They hung at her sides, open, loose, entirely available. And every second they stayed there, they said something about the woman they belonged to that nobody in the pavilion wanted to hear. Count then, Halloran said. Go ahead. Count. What the boy in the pressed cammies did not know is what the next 90 seconds were about to teach him, and what it had cost a woman in a red windbreaker to be able to teach it. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Across the parking lot, 300 meters away, a door banged open hard enough to hear. See, in 1991, she was 36 years old, and she weighed 131 pounds, and she carried 110 of them on her back, over a berm in the dark. There were 4 of them. That was the whole of it. 4 Marines inserted at 0120 on a moonless night, 61 kilometers beyond the last friendly position. Put down on a low gravel ridge by a helicopter that did not land, only slowed, and was gone again before the dust had finished settling. Her team. Her call. A corporal on the gun. A lance corporal who could not stop grinning even then. And Staff Sergeant Renee Alcott, 27 years old, who carried the radio because Alcott always carried the radio. Because Alcott said the radio was the only thing on the patrol that could not be replaced by somebody braver. They went to ground before first light, in a scrape under a cam net on the reverse slope, and they lay in it for 4 days. She would tell people later, in the years when she taught, that the hardest part of deep reconnaissance is not the danger. It is the arithmetic of stillness. 4 days in a hole the size of a grave, and every hour of it you are doing arithmetic. Water, batteries, the angle of the sun on the net, the 12 minutes it will take to break the hide if you have to go, the 400 meters of open ground behind you that is going to be the last 400 meters of somebody's life if the arithmetic is wrong. You do not sleep. You take turns not sleeping. On day 3, the road filled. It came up out of the south in the gray before dawn, and it did not stop coming. Armor, and the fuel that fed it, and the men who rode on it, moving north along a coast road she was close enough to smell. Diesel and dust and cold sea air. She lay under the cam net with her cheek in the gravel and read the column and understood that she was looking at the reason 4 Marines had been put on that ridge. Alcott passed her the handset without being asked. The voice that came out of her was not one she recognized. Flat, unhurried, spaced. A voice putting down numbers on a table, one at a time, so that nobody at the far end would have to ask her to repeat. She gave the grid and the description and the correction, and she held the correction through the second serial and through the third, and the road came apart 1,100 meters in front of her while she lay in a hole and did arithmetic. It went on for 19 minutes. Afterward, there were men in a plywood room a very long way away who listened to the tape of those corrections. And it was those men, not her team and not her battalion, who gave her the name. They said the voice on the tape did not go up and did not go down and did not hurry. Not once. Not in 19 minutes. And one of them said it sounded like cold iron. Cold iron. It stuck to her for 35 years. The extract went wrong the way extracts go wrong, which is to say quickly, and without anybody making a mistake. They broke the hide at last light on day 4 and moved for the pickup point. And the pickup point was compromised, and she made a call. The alternate, 4 kilometers east. Across ground she had looked at only on a map. It was the right call. Every board that ever reviewed it said it was the right call. She has never entirely believed them. Alcott went down 80 meters short of the alternate, with the radio still on his back. They carried him as far as men can carry a man, and then the aircraft was on the ground with its ramp down and the whole world going sideways, and she made the second call of that night, which was the one she actually carries. She took the radio off him. She took the code book and the batteries and the crypto, and she left the rest. She walked out of the Iraqi desert carrying Staff Sergeant Renee Alcott's gear and not Staff Sergeant Renee Alcott. There is a citation. It is 2 paragraphs long, and it uses the phrase, "with complete disregard for her own safety," which is a phrase written by people who have never lain in a scrape doing arithmetic. They read it out in a room in 1992 and hung a Navy Cross on her, and she stood there and could not afterward remember a single face in the room, only the sound the ribbon made coming out of the box. 15 years after that, at 51 years old, they asked her to help stand up something new, a special operations command inside the Marine Corps, an idea half the institution hated on principle. And she spent 4 years in a pit of pale sand, with a whistle and a stopwatch, teaching men in their 20s how to fall, how to breathe, how to lie in a hole for 4 days, and how to make the second call. She was not gentle about it. There are men in their 40s now who still flinch at the sound of a stopwatch. She did it. She told exactly one person, so that fewer of them would have to be carried. And in 1992, a Marine had asked her at a promotion party what the Navy Cross had been like to receive, and she had thought about it and said, "It was heavy, and it was the wrong shape, and it did not weigh what he did." 400 meters from a sodium-lit pavilion, 35 years later, a door banged open in the dark. Ty Halloran heard the door bang open behind him and did not turn around. And that was the last free choice he made that night. He had gone past the place where a man can stop. Everybody in the pavilion could see it except him. Whitlock was standing 6 feet away, with both hands empty and his mouth slightly open. Pruitt had backed off 2 steps without noticing that he had done it. Dellinger was still filming, but Dellinger was filming the way people film a car accident, which is not the same thing as filming a joke. Farrow had come all the way in from the rope and was saying, "Ty, Ty, Ty," in a voice that was getting higher. And Halloran had a fistful of an old woman's collar and no way to let go that did not mean he had been wrong. So he did the thing. He hauled her sideways off the concrete path, one hard pull, using the collar, the way you would move a bag, and he swung her off the walkway and into the pit of pale raked sand, and he let go. The old woman went down. She went down onto one knee in the sand, with her palms flat in front of her and her head up, and she stopped exactly there. And the whole thing took about half a second and made almost no noise. She landed the way people land who have been taught how to. Knee, then palms. Weight distributed across 4 points and not 3. Chin up, eyes forward, spine long. It is a fall you can get back up from in any direction. It is a fall that costs nothing. It is the first thing you learn in the pit, before anything else, before the first hour is out, and it is drilled into you until you do it in your sleep. And a man who has ever spent a day in that pit will recognize it across a dark parking lot at 100 meters. Owen Pruitt did not know what he had seen. He was 23 years old, and he had never been near that kind of instruction in his life. But he had seen enough falls and enough fights to know what a real one looked like, and this had not been one, and the sight of it turned his stomach over in a way the shouting never had. "Ty," he said. "Ty, man. That's... No. No." Halloran stood over her in the sand. "Say it again," he said. His voice had gone thin. There was no audience left in it. Even he could hear that the joke had died several minutes ago, and that what was standing in the pavilion now was just a 22-year-old man in dirty cammies, breathing hard, over an old woman on one knee. "Say it again. Force Recon. Say it." The old woman looked up at him from the sand. Her hands were still flat. Her face had nothing in it at all. Not fear, not anger, not even much interest. And the sodium lamp put a long shadow of her out across the raked surface toward the rig. "I said it once," she said. And then she did the worst thing she could possibly have done, which was nothing. She did not get up. She did not stay down and cower. She knelt in the sand with her palms flat and her chin level, and she waited in perfect stillness, the way a person waits out weather. And the waiting went into Ty Halloran like water into a boot. 10 seconds of it. 15. A man can shout at anything except patience. Headlights swung across the pit. He came across the parking lot at a dead run. Master Gunnery Sergeant Lowell Bracken was 47 years old, and he covered the 300 meters from the barracks door in cammies, with no cover on his head, and his boots unbloused, which is a thing a master gunnery sergeant does not do. And behind him came 4 more men in various stages of undress, running just as hard. And behind them, a pickup truck with its high beams on. He came off the asphalt onto the concrete, and he saw the pit, and he saw the old woman kneeling in the sand with her palms flat. And he stopped as though he had walked into glass. He stopped so hard that the man behind him had to go around. For a moment Bracken did not speak. He stood at the edge of the sand, with his chest heaving, and looked at a 71-year-old woman on one knee. And the whole pavilion, 6 young Marines, 1 old contractor, 4 sodium lamps, held still, and waited for the master guns to say something. And what he said was 2 words, and he said them quietly. "Sergeant Major." He had not said those 2 words to that woman since 2010, and he said them the way a man says a prayer he thought he had forgotten. He crossed the sand and put his hand out. She took it. He brought her up off her knee, and he did not let go of her hand when she was standing. And he did not let go while she straightened the collar of the windbreaker that Ty Halloran had stretched out of shape, and he only let go when she was squared away. And then he stepped back 1 pace and came to attention in the sand. The pit was quiet. "Master Guns," Halloran said. "Master Guns, I didn't. She was. Be quiet." Bracken turned around. He put his back to her, which is what a senior enlisted man does when he intends to stand between somebody and something. And he looked at the 3 of them, and when he spoke, it was in the flat institutional voice of a man reading a citation. "That is Sergeant Major Alma Rennick, United States Marine Corps, retired. Her call sign is Cold Iron." He let it sit. "In 1991, she lay 4 days beyond the berm with a 4-man team and called fire onto the coast road for 19 minutes and walked out carrying her radio operator's gear. There is a Navy Cross for it. From 2006 to 2010, she was on the cadre that stood this command up. She ran the pit, He took one step forward. Every instructor who ever trained you came out of her pit, the block of instruction you were taught to fall with in the schoolhouse. The one you have all had, the one you have all forgotten. She wrote it. I did 4 months on my face in front of that woman in 2007, and it is the reason I am standing here at 47 years old instead of being a name on a wall. And there it was. The word went through Ty Halloran like a nail. His face did what faces do. Confusion first, the honest blankness of a man who has been handed a sentence in a language he does not read. Then disbelief, the small shake of the head. No, this is a bit. This is going to turn out to be a bit. Then recognition, arriving in his eyes all at once, the pieces coming together in the wrong order and too fast. The 800 meters, and the weld, and the way she fell. Then horror, because Ty Halloran had stood on that parade deck at 1700 that evening, with the rest of his platoon, while the sheet went up over the granite, and he had listened to a gunnery sergeant read out the order of ceremony for 0900 hours, and he had heard, and not attended to, a name. The wall, he said. Bracken looked at him. 0900 tomorrow, he said. Third panel. Her name is on it. And the name above hers is the man she carried the radio out for. Behind them, on the asphalt, without a word from anybody, the duty section fell in. It was not ordered. Nobody called them. 4 men in cammies, and 2 more coming across the lot from the pickup, formed 2 ranks at the edge of the sodium light and came to attention facing the pit. And the sound of 8 boot heels arriving together in the dark was the loudest thing that had happened in that pavilion all night. Gus Whitlock, 61 years old, in a facilities polo shirt with a clipboard on the parallel bars behind him, straightened his back at the cage door and put his heels together and stood there like a man who had never left. Ty Halloran's legs went. He did not fall. He put a hand out onto the upright of the pull-up rig and held on to it, and his knees stayed locked, and he stood in the sand looking at an old woman in a red windbreaker, and he began, very quietly, to understand the exact size of the thing he had done. Headlights came up the Motorpool Road. First Sergeant Roy Tolliver got out of the truck without shutting the door. Shane Dellinger, 21 years old, walked over and held out his phone before anybody asked him for it. Sergeant Major Alma Rennick brushed the sand off the knee of her trousers with 2 flat strokes of her hand. Then she stepped up beside Bracken and said, so quietly that only he heard it, "Don't ruin the boy, Lowell." First Sergeant Tolliver did not raise his voice once. He stood the 3 of them at attention on the concrete at 22:41 in the morning cold, and he went through it in the order it would appear on paper, item by item, and it took 4 minutes, and there was not a syllable of temper anywhere in it. Assault. Conduct unbecoming. The video, which was now evidence, what each of those things meant on a page, and what a page like that does to a man over 30 years. The schools he does not get, the jobs he does not get, the door that quietly does not open when he is 35 and has forgotten why. Shane Dellinger cried. Owen Pruitt stared at a point on the wall of the barracks. Ty Halloran stood and took it, which was, Tolliver noted privately, and told nobody, the first thing the boy had done right all night. It was Rennick who stopped it. She had been standing off to one side with Bracken, and she came over, a small woman in a stretched red windbreaker with sand still on one knee, and she said, "First Sergeant, a word." Tolliver came to her, not the other way around. "They will do what they will do," she said. "But you asked me what I want in the statement, so I will tell you. That one," she did not point. She moved her chin a quarter inch at Halloran, is 22 years old. He has been awake since 0430, and he spent his evening humping ammunition cans because somebody else counted wrong. That is not an excuse. It is a set of facts about a boy. Sergeant Major, he put you in the sand. He did. Her voice did not go up. It never went up. And I have buried better men for worse, and I did not press it then either. Tolliver said nothing. You can end him tonight, First Sergeant. It is entirely within your power, and nobody in the Corps would say a word against you for it. She looked up at him. Or you can make him useful for 30 years. I have opinions about which one Alcott would have wanted, and Alcott is why we are all standing out here at 22:45. So I think his opinion ought to count. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault, and let this old woman's story find the people who need it. There is a condition, Rennick said. Name it, Sergeant Major. He is at the dedication, 0900, front rank. So at 0940 the next morning, Lance Corporal Ty Halloran stood in the front rank in dress uniform with his white gloves shaking, and First Sergeant Roy Tolliver stood at his shoulder and asked him twice, in exactly the same voice, to read the name at the top of the third panel. He could not. The sheet had come off the granite at 9 minutes past 9. There were 200 people in folding chairs, and a band, and a chaplain, and 4 general officers, and there were 41 names on the wall, and on the third panel, at the top, in brass letters, an inch and a half high, was Staff Sergeant Reen Alcott, and directly beneath it, in the same brass, the name of the woman who had carried his radio out of the desert. She was up front. She was not in a red windbreaker. She was in a dark suit with a small enamel eagle, globe, and anchor on the lapel, and nothing else. No ribbons, no medal, nothing at the throat. And when the chaplain finished, a major general crossed the grass to shake her hand, and she shook it and said 11 words and let him go. Afterward, the crowd went to the tables where there was coffee, and the wall emptied, and Ty Halloran came across the grass alone. She was standing at the third panel with her hands behind her back. He stopped about 6 feet away, which is farther than a man usually stops, and he stood there in his dress, blues at parade rest without being told to. And then he said, badly, all in a rush and in the wrong order, the thing he had been rehearsing since 2300 the night before. He said he had no excuse. He said he had been trying to be funny, and there was no version of it that was funny. He said the word, ma'am, 4 times in about 30 seconds, and then stopped using it because it had begun to sound like something he was hiding behind. He said he had watched the video twice, which was twice more than he wanted to. He said he did not expect her to accept it. She let him finish. That was the whole of the mercy, and it was more than most people get. She did not rescue him halfway through, and she did not stop him, and she did not make it easier. When he was done, she looked at the brass for a moment. You will not remember what you said to me, she said. In 10 years, you will not be able to tell anybody what words you used. You will remember his name. That is the trade. Halloran said, Yes, Sergeant Major. Alma is fine. I have been retired 16 years. She reached into the pocket of the suit jacket and took out a folded cloth, the yellow kind, soft with washing, and held it out to him. The families come through at 1100. There are 41 names, and the brass has been sitting in a warehouse for 4 months, and it shows. He took the cloth. Start at the bottom of the panel and work up, she said. Always work up. If you work down, you drag the dirt across what you have already done. So they did the third panel together, an old woman and a 22-year-old Marine, in dress blues, with his cover off and his sleeves pushed up, working the tarnish out of 41 names in the sun, and neither of them said very much. And once she reached past him to catch a spot in the hollow of the R in Alcott that he had missed and did not comment on it. At 1100 the families came through, and Halloran stood 2 paces back from the panel with the cloth folded in his hand, and let them get by. A quarter-mile away, on the far side of the barracks, the sodium lamps over the fitness pavilion had been off since dawn, and the sand in the pit had been raked flat again by somebody's punishment detail, and there was nothing out there at all to show what had happened. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.